Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to this regularly scheduled meeting of the Planning Commission for Tuesday, January 25th, 2022. I'm going to open the meeting at 7:30. Can we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And before we do roll call, I'd like to welcome our new member, Mr. Danielle.
Thank you.
Welcome to the group. He's been here before, so I think he knows some of the basics of it. So, at that point, I'll ask for a roll call, please.
Mr. Fitzer?
Here.
Mr. Kucera?
Here.
Mr. Hara?
Here.
Mr. Nushai?
Here.
Ms. Redmond?
Here.
Mr. Sanaki?
Here.
Mr. Tinlin?
Here.
Mr. Watson?
Yes.
Mr. Yell?
Here.
Thank you. And this is a different one, approval of agenda. I've never seen this on the agenda before, but
I added it because sometimes we do wind up tweaking the agenda at the beginning, and I felt like it just made sense to have it on there as an item.
good idea. So, do we need to vote on that?
I would say if you're not going to make any changes to the agenda, you just say agenda is approved as presented.
I plan on making no changes to the agenda. Anybody else want to change the agenda? No changes made, so it would be a unanimous, let's move on, without a vote, I think. Next item would be approval of the regular meeting minutes from January 11th, 2021. Well, that should be 2022.
Oh, it should be 2023.
I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the regular meeting minutes from January 11th, 2022 as published.
Support.
A motion, have support. Any changes? I would have two changes to make in it, two corrections if you, let me see, under agenda item number 6, these are minor, but on agenda item number 6, it said that I opened the public hearing at 7:42 p.m. No one from the public was present, and then it says again, open public hearing, opened at 7:43. That should say closed. I think it's a cut and paste problem. I think the copy was just moved from point A to point B. It happens there, excuse me, and it also happens under agenda item number 7. The same thing. It declares that I opened the meeting, and it should say that I closed the meeting after that, but it reads open. So would you accept it with those changes?
Absolutely, I don't know. I must just read over it.
Oh, I was just seeing if anybody reads these things. And who did the second on that? You'll still second?
I'll still second.
Okay, I'll take roll call then, please.
Mr. Hara?
Yes.
Mr. Nushai?
Yes.
Ms. Redmond?
Yes.
Mr. Sanaki?
Yes.
Mr. Tinlin?
Yes.
Mr. Watson?
Yes.
Mr. Yell?
Abstain.
Mr. Fitzer?
Yes.
And Mr. Kucera?
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you. Agenda item number 6 is a public discussion, items not on the agenda. Anyone from the public wishing to speak? We have one public. Do we have anyone online? No? In which case, I will close public discussion. And we'll move on to agenda item number 7 is the 2021 annual report. I think Joe can talk us through this one, right?
Yes. So under the Planning Enabling Act, the Planning Commission is required to annually submit an annual report to the legislative body. In the case of a city, the legislative body is a city council or city commission. You have a city council. So basically what your annual report is a summary of what you did last year. And I've got kind of a format that I put this in last year and it seemed to work, so we did it again this year. And, you know, it starts with a little intro that talks about why we're doing an annual report. It's because of the statute. Noted some of the difficulties that were caused by COVID last year. And then we've got everybody who served on the Planning Commission last year is listed here, including those members who are not on the Planning Commission anymore. Those of you who are new will be in this list next year. A little bit about who supports the Planning Commission, the department, and then your consultant. And a summary of all the development reviews that you did last year. A summary of all the zoning amendments that you sent to council last year or otherwise discussed. A little blurb about the master plan update that we worked on, which will be coming back to you very soon. A little blurb about the sustainability committee that was established last year, what it's been up to. A note about the bylaws that we did review and update our bylaws last year. In fact, probably look at them again this year at some point. It's a good practice to just sort of look at them every year, and also we have a few new members, so it's good to get their eyeballs on the bylaws too, just so everybody gets familiar with all the procedures of a planning commission meeting. Just looking ahead, we have some more ordinance amendments that we'll be working on in the new year, and we also just kind of sort of gave a blow-by-blow. Here are all the meetings you held last year. There were quite a few of them, and here's what happened on the agenda at each of those meetings. So if there are any questions, corrections, comments, I will be happy to entertain those. If you're satisfied with this or satisfied with it with a couple minor corrections, then your action would be to forward it to City Council for them to receive and file.
Joe, I have one correction.
Yes. Okay.
Under the Planning Commission roster, you have my name misspelled.
Do I?
Yep.
Where did I? Oh, San. Let's make sure we get that as Sam. My son's name is Sam too. So I really should have gotten that one.
And the copy of the bylaws, I looked it up a couple of weeks ago and online. It's November 24th, 2020 was the last time I think that they were modified. That's the latest copy that I can find of them.
Okay.
I wouldn't think there's any drastic changes made to the bylaws at this point anyway.
No, most likely not.
Aside from that, I'm pleased with everything else on there. Anyone else have any comments, complaints, changes? So you want a motion to move this along to mayor and council?
Yes, I do.
I would entertain a motion to that effect.
I make a motion to take the 2021 annual planner report for the Planning Commission and move it forward to the City Council and Mayor.
Support.
We have a motion, have support. Roll call, please.
Mr. Tinlin?
Yes.
Mr. Watson?
Yes.
Mr. Yell?
Yes.
Mr. Fitzer?
Yes.
Mr. Kucera?
Yes.
Mr. Hara?
Yes.
Mr. Nushai?
Yes.
Ms. Redmond?
Yes.
Mr. Sinaki?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
I'd like to comment that was very interesting, very well done. It's like a synopsis of what the heck did you do? And
Yeah, it's nice to see.
it was nice to see, and I think that the council will benefit from that. So appreciate it. It was well done.
Sure, thanks.
Agenda item number 8 is the Planning Commission training.
Yes, so we do have some new members on the Planning Commission and one new old member. So it seems like a good time to do kind of an overview training of especially when we have a little bit of a hole in the agenda. We've had a lot of real busy agendas in the last year, so having one that really didn't have much on it seemed like an opportunity. So I've prepared a little PowerPoint that I'm going to put up here, and I'm just going to go through it. And what it does is it essentially gives you an overview of the Planning Commission, its procedures and role. It has a little annex about the Zoning Board of Appeals so that you understand the relationship to that, and then a little tiny bit about City Council's role as well. And this isn't, like a real formal presentation. If you have a question or a comment at any point, just kind of put your hand up and say, hey, I'd like to ask a question or make a comment. And, I'll move through it pretty swiftly. I don't want to keep you here forever, but, however much discussion it generates is however much discussion it generates, and I appreciate your questions and comments. So I'm going to put this in, I think I have to share it first and then put it in presentation mode. PowerPoint. Come on. There it is.
Need a soundtrack.
Yes, okay, all right. It's doing it correctly. That's good. So we have the content split up into some pretty basic, subcategories. So your roles and responsibility, your types of reviews that you engage in, meetings, running meetings, Zoning Board of Appeals roles and responsibility, and the role of City Council. Planning Commission etiquette I actually moved up ahead of the other stuff. I just didn't remember to change it here. So, this is kind of a basic what is community planning definition as a process for coordinating the impacts that people and their activities have on the physical and social environment in which they live. That involves both the act of planning and then the act of legislating to support a plan. So we plan to ensure a quality of life, to develop a shared vision for the future. That's really what a master plan is all about, right? To protect property rights, to encourage economic development, and predictability is another thing that we're always looking for when we plan. We want to know what we're likely to get when we have development. So we plan for development, and then we create ordinances that support the development that we're planning for. And the process of doing a master plan kind of involves a set of questions to create the plan and then some follow-up. So what do we have? What do we want? How do we get there? That's the plan. Getting there is just sort of your implementation items. And then there's the other element of, is the plan working? Monitoring the plan. And sometimes you can do that actively by, doing a review of your master plan, maybe 3 years in or something, and seeing how you're doing on all your implementation items. But also it comes up just in the natural course of doing business. If someone requests a rezoning, for instance, you're comparing that to your future land use map, and you might find that a rezoning request makes a lot of sense in a place you never thought it might. Or you might find that your plan's working just fine and that rezoning request doesn't make sense there. So there are kind of two ways to monitor your plan. One is sort of organic and the other one is active. When we look at the roles and responsibilities of a planning commission, the Michigan Planning Enabling Act establishes the statutory authority for a municipality to create a planning commission. And your city council enacted an ordinance long ago that created the planning commission and enumerated its powers and duties. And then the Zoning Enabling Act and the Land Division Act do actually allow city council to confer some other duties of an administrative nature on the planning commission. Those are pretty limited in scope.
Hey, Joe? When did city council approve a planning commission? Do you know, just out of curiosity?
1960-something.
In the 60s, approximately?
Yeah.
That's fine, I'm just curious.
7, 8, something like that. This planning commission's been around for a while. So we have, this is slide 1 of 2. Your key responsibilities of a planning commission are to create, maintain, and update a master plan. That's done on a 5-year cycle in Michigan. So the Planning Enabling Act requires a community to review its master plan every 5 years. Doesn't require it to do a new master plan every 5 years or to update its master plan every 5 years, but it requires review every 5 years. You could review your master plan, decide it's working well, and reaffirm it for a further 5 years, but you have to hit that 5-year target. Now, the planning police aren't going to come down from Lansing and, give you a slap on the wrist if you don't review your master plan every 5 years. But if you don't review your master plan every 5 years, let's say you let 10 years go by and you don't do anything with your master plan, you don't update it, you don't do a new one, you don't review it, what you do start to get is kind of a legal situation where someone coming in for that rezoning that's not in a place that it was anticipated on your future land use map can say, well, they haven't looked at their master plan in 12 years, so, maybe my rezoning is justified, and they turn me down on the basis of their master plan. But if you've looked at it every 5 years and you've reaffirmed it or updated it, you're giving yourself that solid legal basis for all of the zoning work that you do, your ordinance and your map. You will review rezoning requests from applicants. That's another of your responsibilities. It's pretty closely related to the future land use planning that you do.
Joe, can I stop you?
Sure. Yeah.
The master plan, so I wasn't here when we did the last one.
Sure.
But in it has a lot of data, right?
Sure.
They did studies on restaurants, from a lot of studies on setting forth that. How often is there anything in there that says we need to have some type of study performed on the city to see, from my understanding is we worked off that study to kind of see how we want to integrate it into the city and achieve certain goals that the city wants, right? Mm-hmm. Do we do anything like that on any regular basis?
Not necessarily. Master plans often kind of establish a framework in their implementation items that gives a city kind of a roadmap for figuring out its economic development picture, and that it might call for a study like that. That sort of thing is certainly not required as an element of a master plan. There are certain elements of a master plan that are required by the state law, but studies and things are not generally among them. Actually, the statute is fairly specific about some of the things you need to include, like a complete streets plan and things like that. Which was added, I think, back in 2008. Snyder was governor. No, so it wouldn't have been 8. It would have been a little later than that. But, that kind of study is usually part of a master plan if it's budgeted for, but it's not a requirement of the statute for that kind of study to be included in a master plan.
Okay. I know we've made certain amendments to the master plan, so it seems as though it kind of is more organic than structural, right? Like as we see city needs and desires, we kind of implement those. Is that?
Yeah, and it's not that you have to wait 5 years either. I mean, you can do an update anytime. And the update could be very small. It could be focused on just a couple of properties, or it could be citywide. It's really a matter of what the city needs, and it's it's possible and it's good to recognize a need ahead of schedule.
So who would bring forth that need? Just curious. Is that something that, just gets talked about, or is that triggered by, obviously I would think that you are up to date on what's happening. But, city council, mayor, or like, are all those avenues of?
It could come from pretty much anywhere, yeah. It could come from, 6 rezoning requests in the same area that weren't consistent with your future land use map. It could come from the planning commission reviewing its master plan, or a planning commissioner going through the master plan and bringing something up at a meeting and saying, this doesn't seem right to me anymore. It could come from city council. It could be a kind of a directive to look at something in the master plan. It really could come from a lot of different places. Most often it is that, it's been 5 years, we should look at things. Absolutely, it could come from anywhere.
Joe, if I could ask a question, because I looked at the master plan a couple times, and there's a couple different dates on it. So what is the anniversary of the 5 year? When would we be at the 5th year, so to speak?
I want to say it's 2024 at this point, because I think the actual adoption date was in 2019 of the most recent master plan. Of course, we've completed an update in the meantime, which we haven't had a public hearing on yet, and it hasn't been adopted. So we have actually looked at the master plan in the meantime. I think we would probably be doing a deep look in 2023 or 24 is most likely the date that we'd be starting to look at the master plan again.
What's on the website right now is dated on like 2017, so.
2017.
Yeah, and there may be another version that just needs to get up to dated, but it's listed as Master Plan 2018-0403, but when you open it up, it's 2017. There's some semantics with the date, I'm sure. But
I'd have to look up the actual date of adoption.
The adopted date might just be different than the date that it was submitted.
Sure.
Completed and submitted. 'Cause
Yeah.
By the time it goes to council, it goes through planning and then goes to council, it just takes a little longer. The last date should be the last adopted date.
Okay.
Look at it.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll make sure we check on that and get you the actual date of its adoption.
If I get it right from your comments, there's nothing to prevent the planning commission from reviewing it more than every 5 years or even
No.
every year.
No, you could schedule an annual review if you wanted to.
And I don't know, maybe it's just on my mind right now because you put together that excellent summary for the last year, and I echo the comments that the chair had, that it's very nice to see, kind of in a succinct statement, what was accomplished and so forth. But, just a suggestion maybe for next year's, it would be neat to go through the goals and objectives of the master plan and try to do a self-assessment, what progress was made towards these, strategic goals, in the positive side, we made ground on this tax base, we made ground on, walkability, for example. These are just hypotheticals. Or we lost ground, we didn't do what we said we were going to do, something to that effect where there's some room for improvement. I think that'd be neat to do. And I would love to have a conversation or a breakout session even this year, to that end, how can we, sort of sharpen the pencils and fine tune anything that may have changed. I think COVID changed a lot, and maybe it's some of these are tragically or gracefully new normal type of changes that maybe would be worth including in the master plan.
So we have a template for a 5-year review, but there's no reason you couldn't use it at 3 years or 4 years or however many years. I could certainly, when we have another kind of light agenda or something, I could certainly give you that template and we could take a little spin through the master plan.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Just to piggyback off of you, I think I was kind of coming on board when the landscaping was kind of being cemented. But that's one thing that your comments made me think about is like how well are we implementing, even thinking back to our last meeting and thinking about like, well, where's the landscaping? Like how well we're meeting, like, I know that's not necessarily in the master plan, but in terms of.
Could be germane to a goal of the master plan.
Right, like green and, so I think it would be helpful to kind of, get our core criteria, I guess, and see how well we're hitting on those things at every meeting, so.
Sure.
Just to back you up.
All right, so, didn't mean to do that. So other things that we do, zoning map amendments and zoning text amendments. Now, the zoning map amendment might be from an application, or it might be something that we actually initiate. It happens both ways. Zoning text amendments can also happen both ways, but they're most often initiated by us. We did actually have an application from an applicant last year, a property owner, who asked us to amend the zoning ordinance. And we didn't actually amend the zoning ordinance the way they initially asked us to, but we did make an amendment. Your other key responsibilities: site plan and special land use approval. You make recommendations to city council on planned unit developments. Subdivision plat or site condominium review. You will never, ever, 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 ever see a subdivision plat. Even townships where there's new development going in don't see subdivision plats anymore. Site condominiums are the way things are done now. Ever since the Condo Act was passed back in the 80s, really, subdivision plats have kind of died. But this city is old enough that it was originally developed by plat. Capital improvement programming, which we are doing for the first time ever right now. And review of public works proposals and new streets. Those are large public works proposals. If like there's a pipe replacement or something, that's not something you typically look at. But if there's, if you were going to add a lane to a street or something, that would be brought to the Planning Commission. So formation and function of a Planning Commission. It's by resolution of the governing body, that being the City Council here. They decide on the number of members when they constitute the Planning Commission, 5, 7, or 9. 9 members for a city the size of Clawson is optimal. I don't think a 5-member planning commission is ever enough, really. It's just not enough people. But a lot of smaller communities do have 5-member planning commissions. The membership should generally be representative of different segments of the community. As many major interests as you can involve, but to a degree, you're taking your qualified applicants, and it's kind of hard to necessarily make sure that you're hitting every single possible sector of the community. Your members will be qualified electors of the city. There can be one non-elector appointed, but generally speaking, it's registered voters. In cities, one member can be a member of city council, and can even be the mayor, actually. And another member may also be a ZBA member. We do have a ZBA member on the Planning Commission. That's Ed. And they act as a liaison. In cities, city managers can actually also serve as PC members if the council constitutes the Planning Commission that way. I do work for one community where the city manager is on the Planning Commission.
Joe, not to unleash a can here, but like, doesn't that conflict with the charter and the whole, like, you have to resign before getting on, running for like council? Wasn't that part of the whole thing here?
In the case of this city, yes, it would, but this charter is unusual in that regard.
So this isn't specific to Clawson then?
Yeah, this is general. This is based on the state law.
Because I was like, oh goodness. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good.
This is based on the state law.
Okay.
So that's in general, but yeah, your charter has some funky stuff in it that.
It's special.
That's,
We'll wait till we get a new city manager and see if he wants to join us or not.
So your appointment here is by the elected mayor with approval from council. It would be a village president in a village or a township supervisor in a township. Your term of appointment is 3 years. They're staggered, so they don't all expire at the same time. If a vacancy occurs in the middle of a term, then the person who is appointed to fill the seat serves the rest of the term and then has to be reappointed to serve a full term. Adoption of plans. So in cities and villages, you need a 2/3 majority vote of the planning commission to adopt a master plan. And the city council can grant itself the right to adopt a master plan by resolution, but it's not actually required by the statute. The planning commission is the adopting body for a master plan. A lot of legislative bodies do elect to adopt a master plan as well as the planning commission, just because it kind of indicates buy-in on the part of the city council or township board or whatever it is. But they don't have to. So city council can employ a planning director, a recording secretary, other planning personnel. They can employ consultants, basically whatever they think is needed to help a planning commission do its job. A planning commission has to meet at least 4 times a year. That's not a problem for us, but in some smaller communities, it actually can be because they just don't have business coming up very often. So they, if you haven't met for 3 months, then you got to meet and at least, conduct some administrative business, approve your last minutes and things like that. Additional meetings can be called by the chairperson or by any 2 members upon written request to the secretary. It's kind of rare for that to happen, especially when you meet twice a month. All meetings have to be open to the public. Planning commissions don't have any instance in which they can do a closed session. Canceling meetings. You can cancel a scheduled meeting. You have to post notice of the cancellation at the location of the meeting no less than 18 hours before the scheduled start of the meeting. We actually go a little bit above and beyond that when we do cancel the meeting. We post the cancellation in a couple of places. But that's the statutory requirement. You do have to adopt rules for the transaction of business. You have bylaws, so you've done that. And you keep a public record of your actions, and that's generally done in the minutes of your meetings, which you approve each time. You approve the ones from the last meeting each time. And then that's held in the clerk's office. So preparation and adoption of a master plan. This is generally considered to be the most important duty of a planning commission, even though you don't do it as often as you do some of your other things that you're responsible for. A public hearing is required to adopt a plan. You also have to notify your neighboring communities and certain agencies like utilities when you're about to plan, and then once you've completed a draft of a plan. That's the stage that we're in right now for the master plan update. And then you are also the body that's tasked with preparing the zoning ordinance. That's authority is granted by the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act. You draft the text and the map. And your zoning map and the text of your ordinance should have a relationship to your master plan. They should really be rooted in the master plan. We have whole districts that spring from specific master plans, where that district or something like it was called for in the master plan, and then it was developed and placed on the map. Last year, we redid all the district boundaries in downtown on the basis of the downtown master plan. You do have to hold public hearings anytime you want to adopt an amendment to the zoning ordinance or map. And you follow that same process for every amendment that you do. And of course, the process isn't that the planning commission adopts an amendment to the zoning ordinance, it's that it makes a recommendation to adopt an amendment to city council. So you'll do your discussion and review, you do your public hearing, you make your recommendation to the legislative body, they discuss it and review it, and then they will, generally in Clausen, the process is that they do 2 readings, and then they adopt it. They could also send it back to you for some revisions if there was something they weren't happy about. So we look at the types of reviews that you engage in. Site plan review is the most common one, generally speaking. And then, you have special land use review, rezoning review, public works proposals, planned unit development, subdivisions and condominiums, land divisions, and cluster housing. You don't look at land divisions here, the council does that. Zoning ordinance establishes your site plan approval authority. So your ordinance has, a section called site plan approval, and that's where all the procedures are laid out. All special land uses and all planned unit developments require a site plan. The city council refers plats to the planning commission for tentative preliminary plat approval and a recommendation of final approval, but like I said, you'll never, ever, ever see a plat. So a site plan is a detailed, illustrated and written document that shows how a site will be developed. I think, obviously if you've been on this planning commission for more than a couple of months, you're familiar with what one is. We have review standards and criteria in the zoning ordinance for site plans. So we have 3 types of standards. There's plan content, which is required information. There's discretionary standards, where it's like facade shall be harmonious with the area, and then you kind of make a decision as to whether or not what they're presenting is harmonious with the area. And then there's non-discretionary standards. A sidewalk shall be a minimum of 5 feet wide. If it's less than 5 feet wide, it doesn't meet the standard.
Hey, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's the right time to go in. So like our last meeting, I was a little bit confused when I was asking about the site plan review. When they come in front of us, we have a list of checks. And I thought that you told us that first do they go to the building department first to check off those boxes so we have a completed site plan? In terms of what our role is, after that meeting I was a little confused, so I was like, let me just go relook at these, the criteria here, and it does talk about water runoff, and we're not engineers, so I'm not trying to be an engineer, but when we have a lot of things on a site plan that we're seeing that aren't addressed on a site plan that need to be brought up, are those things that we are supposed to catch, or is that something that is supposed to go through a chain of commands prior to us?
Generally speaking, that stuff is reviewed prior to getting to you. Obviously, if you see something that you think it warrants attention and it's not mentioned anywhere, then you bring it up. But yeah, in terms of the informational requirements on a site plan, in fact, I included it in your packet. We have kind of modified our internal procedure recently to require earlier submission of site plans by a specific deadline for every meeting. And then there's a week built in for sufficiency review, where we in the department kind of look at everything and go, wait a second, stuff is missing here. And then we give the applicant a week to turn around the missing information. And if they can't turn it around in a week, then obviously there was a pretty big deficiency, and they'll probably wind up on a later agenda.
Right. Well, I was wondering too, like when I was thinking about it, is there a way we can offer kind of like an outlined plan to that, like almost a, because, when I was looking over the site plan review process, just even the landscape, they're supposed to have a detailed landscape.
Right.
Maybe offering them something like, here's what it looks like, here's what a completed site plan might look like, and they can kind of, because if they're coming into our, if it's their first time or second time, they might not even know what those things are. So it might be beneficial to even have something, and I'm not trying to create more work, but have something online where they can say, oh, what is this referring to? Oh, okay, I'll ask so-and-so for that, just to kind of have a reference.
Sure, like kind of
We
a
had something like that,
demonstration.
don't we? have
plan.
something like that, don't we, Joe?
But we also have the pre-development meeting, so everybody that's gonna turn in a site plan meets with the development team ahead of time. So that's where we go over their site, we give them information that we may have on their site. If they hopefully they bring their architect to this one. A lot of times we ask that they already have sort of a preliminary plan, so that we can help them get through the process. The checklist that wasn't filled out before, that was a mistake by the clerk in the building department, who just missed that. But generally, we go through all those things and make sure that everything's complete. Our job is really to make sure that these people are ready for site plans. So we go, and if it takes another development team meeting, we go through it again.
Mm-hmm.
When they turn in their plans, if it's not complete, they get a review letter from Joe. They have a chance to go ahead and flesh something out or change something if it needs to be. So I think we do a good job in holding their hand and bringing them all the way through.
Yeah, I just thought it might be
The site plan process.
helpful to have like a completed, this is not a critique of you.
No,
Just
I
a
take it that
helpful
way.
thing for applicants.
No, I understand what you're saying, yeah,
Even the
like a demonstration plan.
topographical, I forget what it was like, they, like where it shows like,
Sure.
and maybe it's outdated, maybe that's something, I don't remember seeing those very often in site plan reviews over the last 2 years, but, in terms of like, when they come in front of us, what our criteria is and what we're supposed to do to like make sure they're good to go with our stamp on it, it'd just be good to have consensus there, right? Like even if we had a sample site plan packet that was complete 100%, we can go over that with them as, just something on the website maybe. Just an idea, a thought.
We should make sure that they're complete before they come here.
Okay.
We shouldn't have to go through a checklist and see if their site plan's complete. That's not your job. That
I
should be
will
us.
say there have been a couple of
Joe,
times
do you-
where,
Do you only do that for businesses in the downtown?
Oh, no,
So you do- okay.
that's everybody.
Yeah.
That's the development team meets with everybody.
yeah.
Got it.
There have
Yeah.
been a couple of times when plans have been brought to the planning commission after a certain point where an issue just sort of needs to be forced. Here's the body you need approval from. We're not getting the information we need. We're going to have them tell you to come back with more information.
Completely understand,
It
right?
gets to
But
that
that's not
point.
missing like half a site plan either, right?
No, and that shouldn't happen. And
Yeah.
anybody who has an architect, they know site plan. They don't.
Well, they should. They don't.
Yeah.
They don't
And
always.
be fair,
occasionally there's an architect who doesn't
Architect
get
and
it, but-
designer kind of get thrown around a little loosely, I think, maybe sometimes,
Well, we
but,
need stamped.
Yeah, it has to
and
be an
sealed plans
actual
from an
registered
architect
person.
Okay.
To accept them, so it's not just somebody draws up a plan and says, here you
Yeah.
go.
yeah.
I literally, there's an architect in another community I work for. He does about a plan a year there, and his whole modus operandi is he submits whatever he could bang out, and then we review it and tell him, you're missing this, and you're missing this, and you're missing this, and you're missing this. And then he goes and corrects it. And that's just how he does it. That's just his whole way of working. So, yeah,
Nice
You-
fill in the blank would be nice, right? Like fill in the blank. Okay, I have a question, and I forget what you called it, but I did notice you said, who do they come in front of? The site?
The development team,
The development team.
Yeah.
I saw that. Is there supposed to be a person from Planning Commission on that team? Because I saw something in, I believe it was the ordinance that was talking about. Maybe I was misreading it. So who's that team?
The planner,
Okay,
I'm on it as the building administrator. The engineer is there, the fire chief, the police chief, DPW.
DPW director.
Yeah,
and you're all there at the same time?
same meeting.
That's a lot to go in front of multiple times too, right? A lot of,
No,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, first 1 or 2 times are no charge. If it gets into more than that, then that's an architect or somebody that's really having some trouble, and then there's a fee.
Yeah, okay, all right, thanks for the clarification.
All right, so, yeah, I guess your key question is, does the site plan demonstrate conformance with all the ordinance requirements? And if ordinance standards are met, you have to give approval. Site plans can be approved with conditions, but the conditions have to be related to meeting a specific ordinance standard. And we have recent experience with pointing out standards that someone needs to meet. Postponing action on a site plan, so you can postpone a decision on a site plan for an incomplete application, for extensive changes necessary to comply with ordinance standards, if an applicant requests a delay in writing, let's say they just, I don't know, they got into a car accident and couldn't make it to the meeting, they could ask us to postpone. When necessary information from an agency or the applicant hasn't been received, let's say they need DEQ approval for something because they're interfering with a drain in their parking lot design or something. If we don't have the DEQ approval, we can postpone action on their site plan.
Is there like a ballpark charge, say I'm a business coming into town? That's not a flat rate for everybody, is there? Is that?
No, it's generally, there's kind of a base fee, and then there's like a acreage or square footage fee that's associated with it, so that, you know, a very large project isn't going to be charged the same fee as like somebody who wants to put a patio on their
Yeah, I
restaurant.
figured
or
those would be
something.
flexible. So they come in front of us and let's say $1,000, it's going to cost the guy to come in front of us for a decision.
Sure.
And we turn down the decision, but we give him examples of what we want him to do. He goes away, he comes back again. Is he charged again the second time, or?
He's not charged the full fee the second time, no.
Okay, so we give him a cut rate for the second time coming back.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So postponement's also not appropriate for minor site plan changes or information from other agencies. It could be handled as conditions of approval. So if you are going to postpone, you do need a motion to postpone. You do these occasionally. So I think if you've been on the Planning Commission for a while, you're probably familiar with it. There's a difference between postponement and tabling. If you're going to table an item, generally speaking, that's because you intend to bring it back up during the same meeting. And if you anticipate the item coming back at a future meeting, you should have a motion to postpone. So that's the difference between postponement and tabling.
So can I, it's a really silly question, right? Because this is not pertinent to planning. But I understood tabling is something you would actually have to vote into and then vote out of to untable.
Yeah, generally speaking,
If
yeah.
postponement was something that you put a date on, is that not correct? Because
Typically.
tabling, you could table something, like we've tabled things for further meetings, right?
Right.
Is that something, am I understanding that right?
If it's going to be at another meeting, the correct terminology is postpone.
Okay.
And sometimes people do say table, and it's not going to affect things legally necessarily if you say table instead of postpone. But just to be, for clarity's sake, if it's going to be on another meeting, we should say postpone. And if we're going to vote it back off the table later in the meeting, then we should table it. So, let's say you've got 3 site plans on an agenda, and the applicant for the first site plan is not at the meeting. Okay, well, that is a great example of when you might table something. We're going
Move
to
him to
table
the back
this,
of the line,
move
yeah.
it to the back of the line, and they show up, and then you can vote it off the table and deal with it. And if they never show up, you postpone it.
Do you have to assign where you're tabling it at then? Would you say, we're gonna move this to, number
Yeah,
so-and-so
generally
on the
speaking,
agenda?
you would
Okay.
want to move it to a specific spot on your agenda. Yep. That's the right way to do it. So-
Characteristically, we postpone with conditions.
Yes, generally
Yes.
speaking, yep. If you're going to postpone something, you're doing it for a reason, so you're telling the applicant, here's what you got to come back with, yeah.
Okay.
Or you're telling me if it's an amendment or something, like, we want you to do this. So kind of the next level after site plan review is special land use review. Special land uses are, generally speaking, they're uses that might be appropriate in a district, but they do have some characteristics or qualities to them that require individual review of that use in that district to determine whether that specific location in the district is actually appropriate for that use. So you may have, like, let's say you're a community with a large industrial district, and you have a wide array of uses that are permitted in the industrial district. Your most intense uses are probably going to be special land uses. You may even have a condition in your ordinance that they can't be adjacent to residential because they're the most intense uses. And you would look at those kind of on a case-by-case basis and say, this is a really heavy use. It's not directly adjacent to residential, but it is only 100 feet from residential, and that's not appropriate there. It needs to go somewhere else in the district. Generally, it's just due to some negative externality that use might engender. And they just might not be appropriate at all locations in a given district. Especially, let's say, if a community has one industrial district, and that's where all the industrial uses are bundled, there just might be places in that district where the heaviest uses don't make any sense.
On that one, would we want to consider environmental factors on
Yeah.
residential as, and that would be a justified,
Generally
you're
speaking.
a little too close to the residential, if you were that building, you'd be cool, but, so that's something that we can,
Yep.
environmental factors in terms of not just air quality, but noise, things.
It could be
all
noise, vibration, it could be lots of different
It's up
things,
to like
yeah.
our discretion then?
Yeah, it is a discretionary thing, yeah.
Okay.
You do have a certain amount of interpretation that you have to do. And really considering the use and what it involves.
Because when we were talking prior, and I know you said earlier that it was to come in 2022, when we were talking about potentially having special land use for certain licenses that were coming,
Oh, sure, yeah.
proposed. I know that gets hairy, right? It's a little, but there are certain environmental factors to that we, even if we had a certain zoning for that, and again, I'm not trying to go too far into this now, but
Sure.
we would have required a special land use, therefore, we would have seen everything that was to come in front of us, right?
Sure,
If we were
yeah.
To apply this discretionary
Yeah,
criteria.
you would have been looking at every location where it was permitted or where it was proposed and saying, yes, that seems to be an appropriate location, or no, it doesn't.
Okay, thanks.
So special land use review is initiated by an applicant, just like site plan review. The zoning ordinance lists which uses are special land uses, and a lot of zoning ordinances, will have like other uses similar to what's permitted in this district, and then that gives the planning commission the opportunity to review the use that might not have been anticipated when the zoning ordinance was written or amended, and decide whether or not it's similar enough to the uses that are permitted in that district that it could be permitted. You have specific standards for approval of special land uses, and review procedures and required application materials. Special land use applications have to be accompanied by a site plan. Even if you're not changing the building, you do have to show us what's on the site. Because sometimes you might just be putting a use in an existing building that happens to be a special land use. And then a public hearing is required with a 15-day notice for all special land uses. The Planning Commission is the body responsible for special land use review and approval in Clawson. Some communities have the Planning Commission make a recommendation to the legislative body. But in here, it's just the Planning Commission. There are some communities that do it administratively too, but that's pretty rare in Michigan. Conditions imposed on approval of a special land use have to be reasonable. They have to be designed to protect natural resources, people who will use the land, adjacent landowners and residents, or the community as a whole. They need to be related to the valid exercise of police power. They have to be necessary to meet the intent and purpose of the zoning ordinance. And they have to be related to the standards in the ordinance, and they need to be trying to create some compliance with those standards.
I'm sorry, Joe, go back to 3. I don't know that I understand what that means.
So really, police power is vested in the states and delegated to municipalities by statutes. In this case, it would be the Zoning Enabling Act that delegates certain police powers to the city. And police powers can kind of be summed up as the local government's ability to enact ordinances that protect the health, safety, and welfare of its citizens. So, we have lots of ordinances, just like any other municipality, and all of them are in some way related to protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the people who live here. And that includes the zoning ordinance, of course. So that's really what police power means. In fact, the phrase health, safety, and welfare appears in our zoning ordinance probably 2 or 3 dozen times. So rezoning review is the next type of review that we'll discuss. These are the people who are involved. You notice that the public is there because there is a public hearing required for every rezoning review. We have review criteria for looking at a rezoning. Is it consistent with the master plan or with changes in the area since the master plan was adopted? Something might have happened since the master plan was adopted that changes things. What impact does the rezoning have on public services, utilities, and natural features? Can the property be developed with its current zoning? Is there something about the current zoning that makes it just difficult to do something on it? Is it a 50-foot wide property with zoning that requires 20-foot side setbacks? And then you just have this tiny little strip in the middle that you can do something with? Can the property, or is the proposed zoning or use compatible with surrounding uses? So are they asking to rezone, the corner of 2 major streets that's surrounded by residential development to an industrial use or something? That wouldn't make a lot of sense. Will the proposed zoning place a greater burden on nearby thoroughfares? And is there other land currently available for the use? Now, in Clausen, the answer to that last question is probably no, because we're pretty built out. But you might have a lot of other zoning that for that particular district, and it might not be necessary to add more of it.
Now, does it have to be available land, like for sale? Or
Not necessarily.
It doesn't
Not necessarily.
for sale?
Yeah, not necessarily. It doesn't even have to be vacant necessarily. Will the proposed use be able to meet requirements of the new zoning district? So if we rezone something to, B3 commercial, can you actually meet the setbacks and build something that's actually going to work on that property? Is the question we're asking there. Is rezoning the best option? Could you amend the district that is already applied to the park property? By adding the use that they want to do or something to that district?
Well, what would be the difference? Sorry, what would be the difference between those two then? Essentially, a rezone is specific to that plot, right?
Yeah, it's specific to that parcel, yeah.
It would seem a lot less intrusive to do a rezoning than it would be to amend a whole district, right?
Usually it is. Every once in a while, you might find a situation where, let's say you have like a B1 and a B2 district, and there's something in the B2 that you can't do in the B1, but no one can really figure out why when it comes up. Like, why is that permitted in the B2 and not in the B1? It's not any more intense than what else is permitted in the B1. So there could be there could be certain situations where you might find that, yeah, okay, I can see this. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
In your situation, adding that as an intended use.
Right.
A barber shop.
Right,
Or
exactly.
something, right? Like, okay.
Yep. So, and, somebody who wants to rezone something might not always have an intended use that they're telling you about. But you might say no if they can't tell you what they want to use it for, right? That's usually part of the narrative that you look for when someone comes in for a rezoning is, why do you want to rezone this? What do you want to do with it? Would granting the request result in the creation of an unplanned spot zone? So we actually have 3 questions in our review letters that we always ask when we're looking at a spot zone, and they're based on a court case that established the concept of spot zoning. But basically, spot zoning is when you've rezoned a particular parcel to something that's dissimilar from the things that are around it for the specific benefit of one property owner. And it's, like I said, there's a legal test for it, and we always put that in our letters when we review a rezoning. But that's definitely something you want to avoid doing, because that opens you up to challenges. And would rezoning grant a special benefit to the applicant? So is there something that we're giving this applicant by rezoning this property that just, isn't a right that's available to other property owners? That's kind of a hard standard to assess sometimes, because it's sort of like, how special does the benefit have to be, right?
Well, and how many applicants in that criteria are actually in front of you, right? But I can see
Right.
how that's what you're trying to do with an amended district, right? You're trying to avoid that, right? What's fair for
Right.
one is fair for all kind of thing.
Exactly.
Is that the intention of that? Is that kind of the standard of we're just gonna be really fair on these things, and if we see your use as, able to be here, then we should welcome other of those same uses?
Yeah, and that could be a possibility, one possible reason for considering, amending a district or something, yeah.
Is there a favor one or the other in terms of
And
planning commission stance?
rezoning really is a case-by-case thing. One thing that I think is a danger is that people think, oh, we're going to set a precedent if we grant this rezoning. But I think that in general, you should not think of what you're doing when you consider a rezoning as setting precedent, because every rezoning is on a different piece of property and for a different reason, and from one district to a different district, and they really all have to be taken on a case-by-case basis. And what works in one circumstance does not necessarily work in another circumstance. So you really shouldn't think of it as setting precedent when you rezone a property, because someone could come in with a very similar request 3 months later, and it's just not right.
So that would go against the amending the zone then, right? Setting a precedence would be kind of we'll welcome everybody, almost, right?
Well, no, I mean, not necessarily, because you're looking at the
If you're
specific
looking at-
situation again.
Right, 2 different points of view, but if you're saying, we'd be okay with 10 of these barbershops here, we let one in, let's have all 10, that's also setting a precedence, and that's also in favor of amending that district, right? In saying.
Well, you'd be amending the existing district, yeah, in that case. And, yeah, you would just be making that use available in the district that's already on the property.
That was one of the main concerns we had when we agreed to the PUD across the street here, because we've never had a PUD in town, planned unit development.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, people were telling me, if you do it now, if you allow them in, they're going to be everywhere. Well, that's not
That
necessarily
intended use or the PUDs in general?
the PUD in general.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's the way, some people saw it that way. If you let one in, you're not going to be able to stop the rest of them. But they're individual cases. They're not.
Right,
we're
exactly.
not giving
And as long as
amnesty to the city.
as long as your motions are solid, if you're saying why you're approving something, if you're saying why you're denying something, and
Right.
if you have good reasoning behind it, then you're solid. You don't have to worry about, oh, we did this for this property, it's not appropriate here, but I guess we gotta do it for this one. That's just not the case. You can say no to the next one because it's a different situation.
Right, it's like we're getting more and more apartments in town, and we can't stop them. We're gonna be surrounded by apartments before we know what's happening. That's not the case.
We're
Right,
never that
exactly.
cool, right? No city's ever like is in demand as they think, right?
Right.
I was a
Next,
little surprised, though, that you don't have anything that talks about the master plan.
that's the first one in there, I think. Is it consistent with the master plan or changes since its
It's
adoption?
page 2, never mind.
Yeah, we were on page 2.
So long ago.
This one is, in a city like Clawson, this one is not gonna happen very often, review of public works proposals, because the roads are there, the parks are there. You might do something in a park that should come to the planning commission, if you did like a major pavilion or something like that. Generally speaking, the planning commission should be reviewing that stuff. Strictly speaking, it's a government project, so it's exempt from zoning, but the planning commission does have review authority over it. So, you never know. Something could happen. We could have Maple Road could get widened or something someday, and the planning commission would review that. But you're probably not going to see too many public works proposals in a city that's fully built out. It's
Joe,
just-
when they put
there aren't
parking
gonna be
back
a
on the
lot.
street in downtown, did that come in front of the planning commission, do you know?
Do you know?
I don't believe it did. It was a road project.
I don't think
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah, it was a road
Yeah.
project, so it strictly went through engineering.
Okay.
The DDA doesn't, would that fall under like DDA, which doesn't come in front of?
Well, yeah, I mean, generally speaking, a project like that would come in front of planning commission, I think, but, I don't know when that parking was put on the street.
It was all done for that streetscape project in, I don't remember the year, 2014, maybe.
Okay. Yeah. But, you're talking about Main Street, all that stuff there, right? Yeah, that is the kind of thing that often would come in front of a planning commission. I don't know if it may not have been done here, but, generally speaking, that's the kind of thing, like public works proposal that would come before a planning commission.
And we're probably gonna end up looking at bicycle paths again, too, because I think the city of Royal Oak's got a meeting tonight, I believe, on their bike routes.
Sure.
So they might be shipping them down here on Main Street down to Normandy, then we gotta figure out what to do with them when they get here.
Yeah, right, yep.
They're talking about Rochester Road.
Good, that'd be better.
We don't control that part of Rochester, Oakland County does, so.
Yeah,
Okay.
so it's nice to have bicycle people in town, but,
The bike path stops at 15 Mile, and it can pick up again at, on the Royal Oak side. Doesn't go through Clawson because we don't control it.
Is that part of the road diet thingy that they were talking about? Is that?
that's what they're discussing this evening, I believe, yeah.
Yeah.
But Royal Oak controls their own part there, so, because Royal Oak's talking about it in their city, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then it converts to Oakland County that controls,
They have Rochester Road, we don't, we have 14 Mile and we control Maine.
oh, okay. They could put a road diet on us, and we have no say, potentially, if Oakland County wanted to, is that what that means?
Potentially, I suppose.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it is their right of way.
It's a completely public process, though.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
It is a public process. It's not like somebody gets together in a room and schemes or something. Yeah, there are public hearings and everything on that. And if you are asked to take action on a public works proposal, you put your reasons for approval or disapproval in writing, and then you send them to the body with jurisdiction, so road commission or city council or whoever that happens to be. And if you do convey your disapproval, the body having jurisdiction can overrule the planning commission by a majority vote of its membership. So it's not like you have the final word on it or anything, but you do get to weigh in on it. And the planning commission has just a month, basically 35 days, to act on it or it's deemed approved. Your next item is capital improvement programming. This is something that the city's never done before, but we're doing it for the first time now. And we do have the initial reports from all the departments. They've been compiled at this point. We're waiting for some road info. But otherwise, we've pretty much got all the items together, and we are going to be doing some prioritization. But you should be seeing a draft capital improvement program sometime in February at this body, because you will have to hold a public hearing on it and send it to council in time for their budgeting process. And once you've done one capital improvement program, it gets a lot easier because you've got the framework and then you're kind of adding the year at the end and moving things around. But establishing the framework the first time you do it is probably the heaviest lift on capital improvement programming.
Joe, quick question on that. So, I guess being the liaison with staff through this capital improvement process, I guess my general question is, a lot of the requests that were coming through the various departments, while I don't disagree that they are capital expenditures.
Sure.
My general question is, a lot of those items seem to be outside of the purview of the planning commission, like
Sure.
computers, copy machines, IT servers.
Right.
And so those were a lot of similar types of requests. And are in terms of the prioritization and what's going to be presented to the planning commission, is all of those items going to be presented to us as well?
Yeah, those items probably will be presented, but with some priority assigned to them before they get to the planning commission, so that we have a sense of what the city administration feels about the priority for each of those items. We're not going to expect the planning commission to do all the prioritization. In most cities in Michigan, the planning commission holds a public hearing on the capital improvement program, but it's only lightly involved in its creation, simply because the planning commission doesn't have any budgetary authority and doesn't generally deal with a lot of the stuff that winds up in a capital improvement program. In fact, I think it's really weird that the Planning Enabling Act assigns the capital improvement program to the Planning Commission, because so much of what goes into a CIP is just not generally in a PC's purview. But that's the way it's been done in the state law, so that's where we go to do the public hearing on a CIP.
Joe, is that when we did that,
Yeah, the game.
that workshop?
Yes, that
Yeah.
workshop, yep.
Yeah, that is a little bizarre, especially, I could see if they were things that directly tie into like the master plan, and that was gonna be like my kind of question on where you guys were at in that, is if it was like city projects that like, like she was talking about like things like that I could see coming in as
Sure.
capital improvement, but it's more so department heads meeting like the
Right.
police department asking for updated vests kind of things.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of it is that kind of thing. And again, that's why I think it's bizarre that the Planning Commission is the body that's tasked with doing a municipal CIP, because you don't know. if
In the past, we never did
police
it that
need-
way. When I was on council years ago,
Sure.
every department head would come in, we'd have 3 days' worth of meetings,
Right.
and they'd meet with mayor and council, discuss what their budget was, what they wanted, and we made our checklist. I see the CIP thing as just helping out. They're hearing
Right.
the thing, and they're going to give a slight direction to the mayor and council as to where the money should go.
Yeah, and that's basically what you're doing, is you're giving the public an opportunity to.
You have no power to make that decision, but you can
Right.
suggest ideas.
Yeah, and you're giving the public an opportunity to comment on it because you're holding the hearing.
Right.
Wouldn't it be more appropriate, such as you're in the middle of Ohio and somebody's gonna come in and put in a great big industrial process, and this is part of your city, but it's all really either farmland or vacant land or whatever, and you say, oh, well, in concept with that, we gotta put in some roads, and while we're putting in some roads, we're gonna make the developer give us some land for a public park or something like that. So that would probably be more appropriate for the planning commission to say, how does that fit into that area, rather than here in Clausen.
Well, infrastructure is a great,
Yeah, infrastructure
example.
is
Because-
affected by the planning commission's decisions, and this planning commission's decisions are affected by the available infrastructure. So those kinds of things, yeah, it's a little closer to home for the planning commission.
That's like 5% of the CIP, maybe?
It's, in terms of the number of items that are in the CIP, yeah, probably, it's a small percentage.
That's an unfair advantage for DPW and stuff, right? No?
DPW and police are expensive. That's
Yeah.
what you learn looking at the numbers. There's just a lot of money in those departments. You can't run those departments on tiny little budgets. You just wouldn't be able to do all the things you need to do.
Well, I'm actually quite glad that the provision is there, because I think that is a good mechanism for us to guarantee to the city that the funds that are being spent and proposed to being spent are in line with our master plan. And it may be a little bit of a formality, but nevertheless, it gives us the opportunity and the public to come in and say, yeah, that's those new pipes or those new police, that addresses that part of our goal in the master plan. And I'm really glad, Sam, you're participating in that, because I think you have a very intimate view of it now, and I'm grateful you put that time in. Thank you.
Let's see, so, I think that's, yeah, okay. So, kind of on to the administration of meetings. We are, of course, governed by the Open Meetings Act. And what that law is, every state has one, and the federal government has one as well. It's a mechanism to promote government transparency. It requires that meetings of public bodies are made open to the public. There are a couple of exceptions for legislative bodies if they're discussing personnel issues. They can go into closed session, but otherwise, pretty much everything has to happen in the open. And you have to allow people access. If you're making any kind of decision, any kind of action, taking any kind of action, that has to happen in a meeting open to the public. You have to have reasonable accommodations, so during COVID, I guess a reasonable accommodation became that you allow people to see the meeting virtually. And, the emergency orders that allowed us to do fully virtual meetings, of course, are expired at this point. But, that temporary accommodation was made in line with the Open Meetings Act. All deliberations of a public body in a quorum have to take place at a public meeting. And let's say 5 of you found yourself at a restaurant together. Don't talk about anything that has to do with the planning commission, because you're in a quorum if there's 5 of you. And all of that stuff is public record. So there actually is a local planning commission that got in trouble for that about 10 years ago now.
Wait, it's 5? I thought it was anything more than 2. It's
No,
5?
a quorum is a majority of the body.
But if one person excuses themselves to go to the restroom, the other 4 can continue to talk.
Yeah, right.
Just take rest breaks.
Joe, who said, was that the emergency action, whatever, statute set forth by state of Michigan then?
Yeah, the legislature authorized virtual attendance at meetings up through a certain point last summer. And then if you had a local emergency declaration in effect, you could continue to meet virtually through the end of last year. But all of those orders and actions of the legislature have since expired. So it's all back to in-person meetings. We are providing, obviously, a virtual attendance option for people who would rather not be here in person, but that's, not people who are going to be voting on things in the meeting, because
I was just curious. That's local, state, or is that at like the state level?
well, the original authorization for virtual meetings, yes, was at the state level. Yeah.
Okay, because like I watch, like Senate meetings are still virtual.
Yes. It's
I-
good.
I still
It's
watch
good
these
enough for
meetings,
them,
I'm
but
like,
not for us.
Right, how come they get to do that, right?
Yeah.
So it's a local, state thing.
It is a state
Okay.
thing. Yeah.
I'm gonna watch
So.
legislation now. See if any of them are virtual.
So, and importantly, the public can record meetings. If someone's out here with a video camera or something, they're perfectly within their rights to record your meeting. So when we look at conducting planning commission meetings, obviously you're complying with the LMA. You should conduct your business according to your bylaws, which you do. Meetings generally should begin on time and follow the written agenda. So if you've got an agenda that puts things in a certain order, unless you amend your agenda, you should follow the order that's on there. Comments should be directed through the chairperson. So if a member of the public comes up here to speak, they should be addressing the chair. And then if a planning commissioner, after comments are over, wants to address a specific comment, they address the comment through the chair.
So wait, Joe, you're saying don't address them. If someone's speaking though, from the public, are we allowed to, we're allowed to address them directly, or should we not be?
Well, you should direct your comments or answers to their questions through the chair of the planning commission. Yeah.
I can't say that we always do that.
Yeah.
No, I
So,
I can't say I
well,
always do it.
No, I usually just let that kind of open up. If they're up here to say something, I
Yeah.
don't have any problem with
yep.
us asking them direct questions. I mean, Roberts says that it should be formalized, but I'd like to keep it a little more informal if possible.
Okay.
Deliberations, of course, should be in the open. So that means that if you're sitting next to someone, you're not leaning over and whispering to them about how you're going to vote on the motion, because that's not an open deliberation.
Or is it sealed?
That's the very next one. Don't hold private conferences during the meeting. Definitely express your opinions. It just helps if when we're coming up to a vote, it's good if everybody's had their say, right? If you've been silent, then you're kind of the wild card, right? It's not necessarily to say you have to telegraph how you're going to vote or anything, but you definitely should express your opinions. If you're not satisfied with a project that's in front of you, if you think that an amendment needs a rewording or something, definitely put that on the record. And then if you're doing development review, focus on conformance with ordinance standards. So the chairperson, of course, has a role. He maintains order during the meeting and enforces meeting procedures and basically keeps things courteous. Public meetings should be boring. They really should. I mean, I'm saying
They
it as
should be
kind of a
what?
joke.
I'm sorry, say that again. They should be what, Joe?
They should be boring.
He thinks they should be boring.
There should be a kind of a level of decorum that keeps everybody's voice at the same volume, and you don't. If a public meeting has devolved into a shouting match, then it's time to step back, and take a recess. All these Robert's Rules of Order and the Open Meetings Act and stuff, it's all designed to make things dry and boring, because that's how business gets done, right? Business doesn't get done by shouting at each other, and it doesn't get done by people arguing in circles. It gets done by following procedures and making sure that motions are made properly and voted on properly, and that we move on to the next agenda item when we've acted on the one that we were just on. So I say it half in jest that your meetings should be boring, but that's really kind of the goal, that they're boring and they're kind of technocratic and things get done that way. Some guidelines for public hearings. So when you open a public hearing, the ground rules should be, this is of course if you have a crowd. If there's nobody in the audience, you don't really have to go through your ground rules. But if you've got, people in the room, describe your ground rules for the public hearing. We're going to give people this much time to speak. Usually it's about 3 minutes. And you address the chair, and there's not going to be a back and forth, because that's when things escalate. Just make sure that once the hearing has started, that people are following those rules. Now, if you're Ann Arbor and you get 100 people at every meeting, you actually have a shot clock where it's counting down from 3 minutes every time another person steps up there, and when they're done, like the microphone turns off and a buzzer goes off, and they're done. They're out of there. Here, we don't generally have to do that, but still, if you set a 3-minute limit and someone's bumping up against it, you might remind them gently that, we have other people who wish to speak, and, could you please wrap up? Speakers should be courteous and respectful, of course. And typically, speakers should only address the Planning Commission one time. You can have a special request to speak a second time. It's never going to be guaranteed. And if a person's going to speak for a second time, everyone else who wants to speak should have had their opportunity to speak before that person speaks for a second time. Get through everybody and then let that person have their second say. If someone comes representing 12 homeowners or something, and you've set a 3-minute limit, give that person 5, because they're speaking on behalf of a lot of other people. And if all 12 of them came up, you'd be here for a long time, so they're kind of doing you a favor by condensing everybody's comments into one. So you can generally give those people longer. So we don't want to engage in debate with audience members. That doesn't mean we don't address what audience members have said. But we do it after everybody's spoken and the hearing is closed and we've moved to discussion at the board level. You close the hearing after everybody has spoken. You kind of do a last call, which, obviously we do that when we have hearings. And once the hearing's closed, all your comments should come from the PC unless the chairperson specifically grants permission to ask questions of the applicant, his or her representatives, or other parties with a clear interest. So let's say you've closed the hearing, you're into discussion, someone out here brought something up that is very important to the conversation that you're having, but you need clarification on something that they said. You can request that that person comes up and clarifies what they said. That's okay to do. And then when they're done clarifying it, they can go back to their seat, and then you can continue your discussion. It's very common for the Planning Commission to continue to talk to the applicant or a consultant after the hearing is closed. And, that's just because it's necessary, right? You had questions come up during the hearing. You need to ask the applicant how they're going to address those comments. But the Planning Commission drives that. If a motion is made and seconded, all comments from that point on are really about the motion that's been made. If someone makes a motion and no one seconds it, then the motion dies. And of course, you have to call for a second. But if a motion's been made and has been seconded, it's on the table, and that's what you're talking about. When discussion ends, the chairperson repeats the motion and asks for a vote. Usually, the chairperson asks the recording secretary to repeat the motion because they're the one who's got it in front of them, but that's fine. And then once a vote is taken, the matter's over and you move on to the next agenda item. So we have some hints for orderly public meetings. Print your public participation rules on the back of the agenda. We've never really done that, but we don't generally have a lot of, stuff on the agenda that's going to engender a lot of comment occasionally.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we can always put those rules out too when we think we have an item that's going
Isn't there a
to get a lot of
disclaimer taped to
comments.
the podium there about
There is, yes, actually, right here.
height requirements?
Yep, so rules of procedure for citizen participation. I always have a computer on top of it, but all the rules are right here. So you could always put a little pile of those over by the door if you think you're going to have an item that's going to get a lot of comments. Every question doesn't have to be answered. It's nice to answer all the questions, but sometimes you just can't, or a question's just not particularly pertinent to the matter at hand. If things get out of hand, like I said before, take a recess. You don't have to feel compelled to make a decision the night of the hearing. If a postponement is going to lead to a more informed decision or better information, then you should postpone. The Planning Commission represents the interests of the whole city. It's not just the people at the hearing. So people who are in favor of things don't generally show up. So, or who are just indifferent. So typically, public comments skew toward the negative. But you do have to keep in mind that it's the whole city and it's not just the people in the room.
That's a really good point, and I always try and keep that in mind, but for anyone that's new on here, it is true. People that are unhappy show up and voice their unhappiness. People that are happy or complacent with what's going on just don't go there. So it is tough sometimes because you hear what people are unhappy about, but you got to remember, there's a lot of people that are happy with how this something may be moving forward. So I do try and keep that in mind when we're up here.
It's a squeaky wheel thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, if your personal home is being affected, I could absolutely empathize with someone who's, up here voicing concern because,
Sure.
I'm lucky enough not to live next to a certain lot, right? But that doesn't mean they don't have the right to feel that way about,
Well, yeah, and that's why we give them an
And
opportunity.
they do have the
you
right
know.
to feel that way, absolutely, and like you said, sympathize, the people that are getting that apartment built
Yeah.
across from the library.
Yeah.
I ran into him in public too, and I was very sympathetic to his situation. And I did say to him, if I was living next door, I'd probably feel the way you do, but I don't, and unfortunately, a large majority of our city doesn't live near it, and it's great for the downtown.
yeah,
But yeah,
that's the hardest part. That's really the
Yep.
hardest part. Yeah.
But, that's why we give people the opportunity to speak their minds, and sometimes the weight of public objection really is heavy enough that it moves the needle. But again, sometimes it may worry somebody because they're nearby or something, but it just may not be enough to necessarily say no to something. Could be enough to modify something sometimes, maybe that's the middle ground,
Which I think we did do that with that one, didn't we?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Originally,
yeah.
it was 24 units and then it
Right.
became 15.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it definitely came down from where it started out. So making motions. Motions should include a description of the request. They should include the action taken, so if you're approving, denying, approving with conditions, et cetera. Any conditions attached to the approval should be listed in the motion. Reasons taken for the action, it's especially important for denials, because if you're going to deny something, there's a chance that your denial will be challenged, and you want to have solid reasons for making your motion to deny. And then you refer to staff reports when appropriate, so if there's a bunch of stuff in my report or something, you can always say, per the Giffords-Webster letter, blah, 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 this section needs to be met. be sure everyone's clear on the motion before a vote. That's why the chair typically asks that the recording secretary read the motion back so that everybody has it in their head when they're actually being asked to vote. Only entertain one motion at a time. We can't have competing motions. If a motion fails, then you have another motion supplant it.
And I've heard it said in the past, I don't know if there's any fact to it, but when you make a motion, let's say somebody's coming in for site plan approval, and I was always told it's better to make the motion that we are going to approve your site plan and then vote it down, as opposed to making a motion to deny the site plan. It's basically the same thing. I don't know if it sounds better to the applicant or,
Yeah, I mean, I don't really,
I was always told to make the motion in the affirmative.
yeah, I don't
I would-
really think you have to do that.
Based upon my experience, I would disagree.
Okay.
A motion to approve, if the governing body approves, is enacted upon.
Yeah.
A motion to deny, if the governing body, say I made a motion to deny Joe's request, and four of us say, yes, I deny. 5 of us say, don't deny. That is not a motion to approve.
Right.
There would need to be another motion
To
by
approve.
the team that says, okay, now I'm going to make an emotion to approve. And then if the rationale hadn't changed, then it would be approved by that 5-4 vote.
Right.
But there's a situation, there was one time where we got it was in the zoning board, where the motion came up to deny, and the motion was denied, and everybody started to walk away, and we had to say, no, time out. You did not get approval for that variance. You did not get approval because there was no recognition by the body that said that, yes, so
Right.
it could be one way or the other, but I think,
The votes could go either way, but actually,
Yeah.
it's probably clearer if you're not happy with the site plan. You're probably further ahead saying, let's deny it now and give them reasons why we're denying it and have
Right.
them come back again. That's basically what we've been doing, I think.
well,
Right.
we have done that. That's
Yes.
Right.
But then again, it's a little bit difficult. And I guess there should be some general understanding and maybe instruction to me. If I make a motion to deny and then vote against the motion, can I do that?
You can vote against your own motion. There's nothing that says you have to vote for your own
Well,
motion.
all right, if I make a motion, going back, I misspoke. If I go with what Chair said, if I make an motion to approve Joe's plan, and I list the reasons why we should approve it, and then it comes up, and it comes around to me, and I vote, no, I don't approve.
Well, can people make motions just to move things along as well? I
You
mean,
can,
not that
yeah.
that's why you want to make a motion, but I would, me personally, I wouldn't make a motion unless that's where I'm going with something, right? Like,
Normally, you don't make a motion that you disagree with.
yeah, like, so it makes sense, but sometimes I've heard meetings where people will like, let's just get this on the table, vote on it, and move along, because there's not a strong consensus, right? So you might just do it in an affirmative, just to get a feel, right?
Yeah.
Or
And you-
no?
And you can do that.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if the motion to approve fails, then you should have a second motion to deny, and then figure out your reasons. See, I
I
think,
don't understand that, because if I make a motion to approve, and
It gets voted down.
it gets voted down,
sure.
Someone might
And
want to
it's an agenda
modify,
item.
But here's
someone
the-
might want to
Number
modify
of-
it.
Here's the thing, you
Right.
haven't given
Motion.
any reasons for your denial, and that's dangerous. If
Well-
if you're not going to approve something, you want to have reasons on the record for not approving it. And I really think that if you're denying something, you should have a motion to deny. That's my opinion. I think a motion to deny is much clearer than just letting a failed motion to approve hang in the air.
I would recommend, I would say that too, and I know that we've done it, and sometimes it's cumbersome, but I found it easier to get a motion to agree on the facts
Yeah, sure.
first,
Yep.
rather than use those facts in a statement to approve. That's why I know I've done that more than once, because it's too cumbersome to put all that stuff together and say, and yes, so this is the reason to approve. I think so a lot of times it's easier to just say, do we agree that these particular facts were presented with respect to this issue?
Sure.
And
yep.
then say, okay, now I'm going to use that agreement of facts to say that there's insufficient rationale to support approval of the applicant's request.
Sure, yeah. Yep. Yeah, I like that approach personally. Yeah, I like the way the ZBA does it. I think it works really well, especially for the role of the ZBA.
Joe, let me just ask a quick question. So you said it's dangerous not to cite your reasons for the denial.
Right.
Walk me through what that would look like. I vote no, the body votes no. We have a lot of discussion, we talk about this, that, and the other thing, but we
Sure.
don't specifically call out why we're doing it.
Sure.
Now what happens?
Well,
Negatively, in your mind.
you haven't said we are denying this because it doesn't meet this standard of the ordinance, that standard of the ordinance, or if, in the case, like say it's a special land use or something, it's not appropriate in this location for the following reasons. Or if it's a rezoning, you're not saying that we are denying this because it's inconsistent with the master plan. If the person who's aggrieved by that decision, the applicant, then says, well, I'm not happy that I didn't get approved, most likely you're going to ultimately find yourself in, well, they'll probably appeal to they'd have to go through the Zoning Board of Appeals to, to appeal the original decision. But let's say the decision is upheld there. They're going to ultimately, you're going to find yourself in court with them, and they're going to say, well, they didn't give me any reasons. They denied my plan. And generally speaking, circuit court judges don't look favorably upon that. They're most likely going to be inclined to work out some kind of consent judgment that gets the applicant close to what they wanted, because there was no reason given for the denial. There was no ordinance standards cited. There was no explanation for the denial. It was just not approved. And if you instead make a motion to deny and say, and here's the reasons we're denying it, then that's on the record, and the judge can assess the reasons for denial on their merits, instead of just dealing with this wasn't approved, and I sort of have to take the city's word for it that it shouldn't have been approved. You're always better off having your reasons for denial on the
Great
record.
explanation, thank you.
Joe, I have a question based on that. So I know that Ed talked about, and I do like the way I like the way you've done it in the past, where you state what did you call it, fact?
Finding
upon
of facts,
fact
yep.
and point. But so how, if we have something in front of us that is there something that you would recommend as too far gone to deny versus give bulletins versus like saying yes based on these? Like, is there a framework for that you kind of default to or think that works well?
Well, I mean, generally speaking, if there are informational deficiencies or, minor inconsistencies with the ordinance, an applicant should always be given an opportunity to rectify that. Sometimes more than one opportunity. It really kind of depends. With a site plan especially, you really need to ground any kind of denial in the ordinance. So if you had a person who came in who had a plan that was not compliant with the ordinance in some respect, and you say, well, your plan's not compliant with the ordinance in this respect, and they say, I'm not changing it. And that's it. And you talk to them and you say, look, if you don't change this, we're going to deny you. And they say, I'm not changing it. Then you deny because it's not compliant with this and it's not compliant with this. If they're up here and they say, well, I can make some adjustments and try to become compliant with those standards, then you give them a chance to become compliant with those standards, to come back to you with a revised plan. But if they're flatly refusing to comply with the ordinance, then yeah, absolutely, that's grounds for denial.
Because even if we did deny it, they still can come back in front of us though, right?
Oh, sure, yeah, they could come back with a revised plan at any point in the future if they wanted to. But yeah.
But our objective is to make sure any changes are put in the actual plan itself. Like, they can't come in here and say, we're gonna paint the building this color, and unless it's written down on a piece of paper, we have no guarantee that they're gonna do that. We have no guarantee that they're gonna plant a plant, they're gonna do any of this stuff.
Yeah, I was just saying so instead of making a bullet point list, we said, no, based on this bullet point list, is that different than saying, you're not ready yet, here's your bullet point list? Is there a difference between saying no and voting?
Well, yeah,
basically
voting
give them a
to
list of things to do
postpone,
and
yeah.
send them away and have them.
Yeah,
come back.
but the no vote also gives them a list of things to do, and they still come. Is there a
No,
difference in them coming back in front of us?
The no vote is the reasons you voted to deny. These are the reasons we said no. And the motion to postpone, the bulleted list that you're giving them in a motion to postpone is kind of giving them marching orders for what they need to do when they come back.
Gotcha, okay.
But yeah, if you're denying, yeah, you're going to have a bulleted list of reasons for denial. But it's going to be final. Here's why you were denied, and if you want to come back, you can come back. But this is why you were denied.
So it seems like the denial things should be based on things that they necessarily can't change, maybe about zoning, like you referred to earlier, versus we don't like the color of your building, as George was saying, or whatever, and that should be the criteria to deny versus postpone. Is right? Like,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, if they're just not willing to become compliant with the ordinance, or if there's something that's just really egregious, or for a rezoning, if they're just clearly way out of whack with the future land use map or something like that, those are all good reasons to deny. But yeah,
I
if they can.
I think one of the other things that you might have hinted on, and we've had this a lot, it's more prevalent in the zoning board, but you get 15 homeowners in the room saying, if that development goes in, the fire truck can't get down my street. And every one of them stands up and says the fire truck can't get down the street. But the fire commissioner and the road commissioner and everybody else says the passage of the fire truck is very adequate, we have no concerns. The ability of the fire truck to get down the street is not an issue. When you come up with the finding of a fact, it's better to say, the planning commission agrees that there's ample support from the fire department and the traffic department that says that this development will not cause the inability of a fire truck to get down the street.
Sure.
Even though you had 10 people out here using the fire truck as a reason not to do that. So it takes the emotion out of it.
Sure.
So you're saying, we recognize your concern, but we've got other pieces of data that we feel weigh more than your statements of what you think.
Finding a fact.
Yeah, so sometimes just getting everybody to agree, because you might not agree that the fire commission statement was resolute enough to say that, and I might say it is. And if most of us say that it's not, then, well, it's not a true statement.
So we vote on we vote on finding a fact then. Have we voted on that? No, I'm getting.
Absolutely.
Sure, we have a few
voted on that?
times, yeah.
Okay, because I know you've done it before, and I'm not questioning whether you did it properly, but, so we vote on that prior to the motion.
It just says this, we as a commission agree on these baselines.
Right.
And characteristically, we get to the point where everybody agrees that those are good baseline statements. And
Yeah.
if you don't have a good agreement on baseline statements, then I would say, we're not ready to do anything further.
Exactly. You might be looking at a postponement if you can't agree on the basics. Yeah, you might need more information. Okay, so Planning Commission etiquette. This is good for pretty much anybody on a public board. Email communication. So communicating with the rest of the Planning Commission on Planning Commission matters via email could be an Open Meetings Act violation. If you're discussing a particular agenda item, for instance, it's best not to do that via email, because not only are you engaging in non-public communication on an item before the Planning Commission, you're also creating a paper trail of that communication. So you can email the rest of the Planning Commission if you see a cool article in the Free Press or something and you think it's relevant to planning or something. You could always send a link. It's probably better to send it through the chair than it is to just send it to everybody. But generally speaking, if you've got like an amendment that you're talking about, or a site plan or something that's around it, don't send an email to the whole Planning Commission about it. Just don't, because that could be a violation of the Open Meetings Act. And you just don't deliberate on things. Even amongst two planning commissioners, you really shouldn't deliberate on something that's going to be before you. Like I said, passive comments or, sending a cool article, that's probably not going to violate the Open Meeting Act, but it's just best not to do that kind of thing, especially in a quorum. The email account that you use to receive Planning Commission communications could be subject to FOIA requests, so that's why we give you city emails. Stinks to be sifting through your personal email to find stuff that's related to the Planning Commission, so just keep it all at that City of Clawson address. If you're receiving things at two email addresses, one at the City of Clawson, and you've got a personal email address that you're receiving things at, it's all duplicated, so the City of Clawson one should cover you. Conducting site visits, you're always free to visit a site. It can help you better understand proposals and concerns. Don't enter a site without written permission from the property owners unless it's a public place. If it's like a store or something, obviously you can go and stand in their parking lot. Like, you don't need their permission to be on the site, because literally anyone can walk onto the parking lot of a store. That's more for projects that are kind of in the residential realm. If you're going to be going inside and looking around, that's when you just want to start asking permission, if you're kind of trying to check on a floor plan or something. And if a quorum of planning commissioners are going to go to a site together, they have to provide public notice if they're going to do that. So just avoid that. Go on your own, but then don't get together with other planning commissioners. That makes things messy. You just want to avoid communications on Planning Commission business outside of Planning Commission meetings as much as possible. And you also, like, let's say you're on the site and the store owner comes out and starts talking to you. Don't telegraph your intention to vote for their site plan or to vote against their site plan to the person who you're talking to. You really want to avoid prognosticating about their chances at the Planning Commission. Giving an interview. You might be approached by media to provide a comment or give an interview on a planning issue that you're involved in. So there's really a couple of questions you should ask yourself right off the bat. Is one, can I respond to this? Like, legally, can I respond to this? And do I know enough to respond to this? Like, am I going to be able to give an informed response? Is responding ethical? If it's an open case, you might not want to respond at all because there's kind of a danger that you're going to telegraph a future vote. You never want to say how you're going to vote or how you think other members might vote, because that's really something that's supposed to happen at a meeting in public via a motion. And you really just don't want to put that out in the media before you get to that point at the Planning Commission. If you can respond to the reporter, give yourself the space and time that you need. Do it when you feel comfortable, when you understand the scope of the interview. What are they asking about? Who do they write for? Does that publication have an agenda? What's their deadline? What is their story actually about? Is it about this specific item? Is it trying to gather information on this item in the service of a larger story? What's their scope? What do they already know? Who else have they spoken to? When's the story going to run so that you can actually see how it comes out? These are all things you want to know before you answer any questions. And then also just consider, you do have to feel comfortable. You might not feel comfortable answering off the cuff in person. You might say, email me your questions so that I can take some time and think about my answers. And if they don't agree to that, well, then the interview just doesn't happen. But make sure that you are comfortable with the circumstances of the interview before you agree to answer questions. And this kind of goes back to my comments about, having them email you the questions, because you want to take time to think about how you want to respond. You're going to be responding for yourself. No one person speaks for the whole Planning Commission. So obviously it's going to be based on your perspective. But you kind of want to have your thoughts in order before you start answering. Try to avoid using jargon. A common tactic of a reporter is to ask a question, and when you answer it, they don't say anything, trying to get you to fill space by saying more stuff. And you don't need to feel a need to fill the silence, right? You can just give your answer and say, okay, what's your next question? And just stick to your message, and don't be afraid to tell them that you don't want to comment on a specific question. Conflicts of interest, these do arise sometimes. You live and work here. If there's a remote possibility that a decision is going to benefit you personally, you have to tell your fellow commissioners about that. If you're unsure as to whether you should recuse yourself, talk to Rennis, our city attorney. If you stand to benefit financially from the outcome of a case, either from an approval or a denial, then there's definitely a conflict of interest and you should recuse yourself from deliberations. So if you're the applicant, obviously you can't be up there deliberating on your own site plan or something. If you're close relative, particularly like a spouse or someone else who's kind of immediate family is an applicant, then you should probably recuse yourself. If a business associate, let's say you're a partner in a law firm and the other partner in your law firm is a party to an application, you should definitely recuse yourself. If a personal friend is an applicant, it's not always a conflict, but it could potentially be a conflict, so you're going to want to explore that with the city attorney.
So if it's a personal friend, do we just let Rainus know, or you, and then you guys decide, or what's the situation?
I would start with Rennis and just, you know, get his opinion, and then you're going to bring it up to the planning commission. So even if you don't have a conflict, let's say you talk to the attorney and he says there's no conflict there. It's still good to air it and say, I have this association with this person from 10 years ago. I'm not involved in business with him. It's not going to affect my decision making. I just thought that the public should know that I did business with this guy 10 years ago. I've had planning commissioners in many communities do that kind of thing. It just clears the air. It's transparent, right? Having an association with someone just doesn't automatically mean that you're going to have a conflict. But the closer that person is to you and the more involved financially with that person you are, the more likely it is that you're going to have a conflict. That's the end of the Planning Commission bit. I do have a little bit on the Zoning Board of Appeals and City Council in here that I can go through quickly. Just so that this is kind of like ambient awareness for most of you, because only Ed's on the Zoning Board of Appeals. But basically what the Zoning Board of Appeals does is it interprets the zoning ordinance or map. Let's say there's a line in the middle of a street on the zoning map, and we're not really sure how that affects the surrounding properties. The Zoning Board of Appeals is the body that you ask to make that interpretation. Appeals of an order or decision of an administrative official or a body such as the Planning Commission or City Council. So someone does not like the decision that was undertaken by the zoning administrator, they can appeal to the Zoning Board of Appeals to overturn that decision. And the Zoning Board of Appeals has some standards for whether or not it can overturn that opinion. And then appeals of special land uses and PUD decisions are not actually permitted by our zoning ordinance. So those have to be specifically permitted by a zoning ordinance. Otherwise, if one of those is denied, then the only recourse you have is to go to court. And then variances from the standards of the zoning ordinance. So we have a 10-foot setback requirement. Something about your site means that you can only get 8 feet. Go to the Zoning Board of Appeals and ask for that 2-foot variance to build what you want to build. So when they're interpreting the text of the zoning ordinance, their interpretations do become the official standard. And if the Zoning Board of Appeals has been asked to interpret a standard in the ordinance, then the next step for the city should be to take the Zoning Board of Appeals' interpretation and either put that interpretation into words in the ordinance or change the ordinance to, do what it was intended to do but didn't. So if an interpretation is made at the Zoning Board of Appeals, it should pretty much always be followed by an amendment of some sort. And the Zoning Board of Appeals has some guidelines for interpretation. They're listed here. Administrative appeals. So appeals to decisions regarding zoning ordinance issues are the responsibility of the ZBA. They have to be based on the record. So let's say that somebody's appealing a decision of the Planning Commission. The record is going to give the reasons that whatever the person was asking for was denied, right? And the Zoning Board of Appeals then reviews those reasons as part of the record. All the decisions should be based on the record of the decision or the action being appealed. You're not substituting the ZBA's judgment for the judgment of the entity being appealed. What you're really doing is limiting the Zoning Board of Appeals actions to whether the original decision constituted a breach of duty or discretionary power. So the Zoning Board of Appeals is sort of looking at, well, here are the standards that the zoning administrator had to review this particular request. But the zoning administrator doesn't seem to have really followed these steps in the course of denying. So we're going to overturn the decision of the zoning administrator and give them the approval, or send them back to into the approval process with a different understanding of how that should be conducted. It's only addressing the appeal that's requested, and then it's seeking planning and legal advice as needed. So you're pretty much always going to talk to the attorney when you have something like this come up. Yeah, we don't allow the SLU and PUD appeals, so we'll skip that one. Non-use variances. So when you have someone asking for a variance from a setback or lot coverage or something like that, generally speaking, the standard is that they have to prove that there's a practical difficulty that's created by meeting the standards of the zoning ordinance. And then the Zoning Board of Appeals kind of has a series of questions that it goes through and says, is the problem self-created? Is this something that, the person who's asking for the variance, is it a problem they created themselves? Is it due to unique circumstances of the property? Would strict compliance with the ordinance prevent the owner from using their property? Would a lesser variance than what they're requesting actually provide the relief that they need to use their property in a way that's consistent with the ordinance? Will the spirit of the zoning ordinance be observed, public safety secured, and substantial justice done? The public safety standard is in there because we don't want to grant a variance that causes a building to hang over the right of way, and then all of a sudden there's problems that are caused by that, right? We can look at the character of the surrounding area. Is the request consistent with that character? Let's say a whole street was developed 50 years ago when there were no setbacks, and all the houses are, we have a current net zoning ordinance, the current standard is 25-foot setback and everything's 15 feet. Somebody comes in to develop the only vacant lot on that street. Are we going to make them meet the 25-foot setback and be 10 feet further back than everyone else's house? Or are we going to give them the variance to be in line with all the other houses? That's one instance where a character could really be a driving factor behind a variance. Will the variance confer a special privilege? Is the variance request the minimum necessary to allow reasonable use of the property? And are there alternatives that could minimize or eliminate the need for a variance? Use variances are a little different. A use variance permits a use that's not otherwise permitted in a district. They're pretty rare. Cities and villages can grant use variances. Townships have to have a record of granting them in order to do it. The applicant has to show that strict application of the ordinance would result in an unnecessary hardship. So it's a different standard. It's not practical difficulty, it's an unnecessary hardship.
So how's that different than a PUD? Just, maybe I missed a part of that.
It is, in some respects, it's actually very similar to a PUD, because in a PUD you can request uses that aren't permitted in the underlying zoning district, right?
But this would be an owner that's already there changing a use of that building? Is that what, what would change them going in front of him versus us?
I'll give you a good example of a use variance. This is in another community that I work for. There was a historic house, actually a really rather beautiful historic house. And it was in a multifamily district, but it was on a street that was entirely fronted by office buildings. And an applicant came in and said, look, I don't want to live in this house, but it's a beautiful house. It's historic. It should be preserved. Can I, and they didn't want to change the zoning because the future land use map had it as multifamily, and the city just wasn't going to go down that path. So he said, well, can I use this building for an office? That's not a permitted use in that district. And the Zoning Board of Appeals in that city said, yes, that is a reasonable use of this property given everything that's going on around it. And then they came to the Planning Commission with a site plan and got that approved after they got the use variance approved. But that was one instance where it just sort of made sense.
Because that could have been a PUD though, right?
could
I mean,
have,
we had that one,
but-
and I'm not trying to be bad, but I'm just curious. The one on 14 Mile there, the house that was like, was that B3 or something? And they converted from residential?
Oh, B1,
and then, yeah, and now it's like a mixed use. Like that was but I guess that wasn't a full PUD, was it?
The tribal fair?
Yeah.
that was a site, that was a site plan, yeah.
Yeah. So they went to you guys first, right? As this? Would that have been?
No, they never got any kind of use variance or
Oh,
anything.
I'm just trying to connect my dots, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, use variances are rare because the circumstances where a use variance makes sense are rare. But they do happen occasionally. Just some little bit about the operations of a ZBA. You need a concurring vote of the majority of the members to pass a motion. So if you have a 5-member ZBA and 3 members are present, you have a quorum and conduct a meeting, but all 3 members who are present have to vote yes on a motion for it to pass. Appeals of decisions by the ZBA are taken to the circuit court. And rehearing of the same case by the ZBA after denial can't occur unless there's a substantive change to the requested variance or appeal. So once you're through the ZBA, you're done with the ZBA. I think we'll kind of gloss past that last one, but and then we do have a role for the city council in some of this. They appoint members of the PC and the ZBA. They do the final adoption of zoning ordinance text changes and map changes. So you're always recommending those to them. They do the final approval and denial of rezoning requests, and also planned unit developments and subdivisions. And, as in their role administering the city, they're ultimately responsible for ensuring the ongoing training of staff, PC and the ZBA.
I have a question about the ZBA, maybe.
Sure.
I'm just curious, and I know you don't know off the top of your head, but like, how many do they see that are contesting planning commission? Like, do you guys record, like, how you
don't think it's
tallied up all
happened.
our stuff for the year? Do you keep track of, like, these are contested? Just curious to know, like, how wrong are we
I
most
have-
of the time, Ed?
Yeah, I've never
Now,
had,
Clausen, has there been anything administrative or
it's pretty
planning
rare.
commission contested to the zoning board?
It's
okay.
really quite rare that you get an appeal to the ZBA of an administrative or board action. It happens, but it's not common.
It's mostly residential, looking for, like, a fence and things like that? Is that what it's
The
typically?
vast majority of
Okay.
things. Yeah, it's setback variances, I need a fence where it's not permitted, that kind of thing. That's the vast majority of stuff that you get at zoning board appeals for the most part, in most communities.
Okay.
And Rennis isn't here to answer, but I don't know that the ZBA or anybody from Planning Commission has ever gone to a court system. I don't know if anybody's ever taken our decisions to a higher court level. I haven't heard of it in years.
I don't think you have any consent judgments on your map.
Can you knock on wood real quick?
I mean, I work in communities that have consent judgments all over the place, So I have one community where there's an entire industrial park in residentially zoned property because of a consent judgment that happened back in the 70s. And they've just never changed the zoning. They just left it because, well, we can't do anything about it. They built an industrial park there. So, yeah, consent judgments can be pretty wild sometimes.
It's a feeling of the judicial system then, right? Not the city, right?
Yeah, I don't really know how that one happened,
That's
but
crazy.
there are definitely lots of examples of that in Southeast Michigan.
In southeast Michigan?
Yeah.
There were a couple incidences where applicants came to the ZBA, and we gave the applicant a set of instructions and basically postponed the decision based upon their need to do something. And then the city legal counsel resolved the issue because they didn't, legally, there was a bunch of things that they decided that it was better to get an agreement and move on than to bring it back to the zoning board. But the only thing that really went, to the best of my knowledge, was the billboard sign, which went quite far. But because of the training of the zoning board and the method that we were used, the judgment held up because the courts at that time looked at it and said that team made a decision based upon an assessment of facts, and
Right.
there was no reason for the court to say that it was done improperly. So we were successful, but there have been a couple of things that just every once in a while, the building department and the planners and the attorney go, nah, let's just take this aside and make it a decision.
Yeah.
Oh, the other one was Phil Cavell's turning into Pet Boys, the big sign. That was another
Yeah.
thing that came before the planning commission, or the zoning board, and then it was resolved legally, so.
Sure.
Well, and if it's resolved, and I don't know, I'm not an attorney, but is there a different outcome when it's resolved outside of courts? It's not necessarily, like you said, turning up your zoning map and your charter, right? Like, you can kind of give a little leeway there, whereas it's not written in stone, I guess, right? Is that an advantage to that then? If you kind of, okay, we'll let you get a, you know.
Yeah, as far as settling things,
the
that's
same
really
thing.
something
It's the
I'd
same
have to
thing?
ask.
City
you know.
attorneys.
If you settle and if the judge makes a decision, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
But if the judge, so if the judge makes a decision, it doesn't have to go into, like you were saying, that city where they had all this in their contested in
If a
their
judge
charter.
makes a decision, then it's usually a consent judgment. But yeah, settling can happen out of court, and it ultimately resolves the issue.
So it's not a consent
You just wouldn't have a
judgment in
consent
your-
judgment on your hands.
It's not a consent judgment, it's a judgment. Consent judgment is when the parties agree.
Yeah, when the parties agree, exactly. Yeah, that's what you usually wind up with.
Yes, because if a judge makes a decision, that can be appealed. A consent judgment doesn't.
Right.
Which one goes in the ordinance?
What do you mean?
Well,
Where it changes
it's
your-
not so much that it goes in the ordinance, it's that if you have a consent judgment on your hands, you want to put it on your zoning map so that people are aware of it in the
Oh.
future.
Right, okay. Gotcha.
But yeah, a consent judgment has to ultimately be approved by the legislative body, and then if it's ever amended, then the legislative body has to approve an amendment to a consent judgment.
Correct.
Sounds complicated.
Yeah, it can be, yeah.
Troy has a lot of issues with those. We have a
Sure.
case in Supreme Court now of Michigan.
Oh, yeah.
You said Troy?
Yes.
Oh, they're big, yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, bigger communities tend to have a lot of them.
Especially, they're kind of, sporadic a little, right? I'm sure there's a plan there, and it's not a judgment on them, but.
No plan. They're just-
I mean, because really, you could probably argue just about putting anything, just about anywhere if you're on a main
Right.
road in Troy, right?
Yeah.
So it's not as like, here's our downtown, we're Clausen, Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah,
Supreme Court,
a lot of,
United States, Supreme Court of Michigan, but
yeah.
Supreme Court nonetheless.
yeah. But you see, I see a lot more of them in freeway communities, I think, too. And you see test cases, too. Larger communities tend to be targeted with test cases more often. There was a Southeast Michigan community that got targeted by a billboard company. They were just testing to see if they could get a law struck down, and, they poked at this community to do it. It's kind of luck of the draw sometimes. But that's it for the training tonight. Anyway, I just figured the timing was good. And I also included in your packet kind of like a planning commissioner orientation packet that we developed a while ago, so you can have that, for reference. in the future, and I'll send you the presentation from tonight too. I didn't get a chance to do it before the meeting, but I'll do it when I get home.
As a junior on the team here, I thank you very much for going through all that. It's very helpful.
Sure.
Thank you. Agenda item number 9 is other business.
There's not any.
Anybody up here, any business? No. Move on to planner's report, which was,
Yeah. I provided you guys with the new deadline and procedure schedule in your packet, so that's really all I had for tonight on that.
okay. Staff report and training opportunities.
I think you've had enough training tonight.
For what trained out. No legal update. Any other questions before we go to adjourn?
I make a motion, oh, do you want a motion? I'm sorry, I should have went to you.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn our meeting?
Second?
And motion second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Watson?
Yes.
Mr. Yell?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm still getting used to this microphone. Mr. Fitzer?
Yes.
Mr. Cusero?
Yes.
Mr. Hara?
Yes.
Mr. Nushai? Ms. Redmond?
Yes.
Mr. Sinaki?
Yes.
Mr. Tinlin? Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Well done, Joe.
Yeah.